My name is Madison, and 3 months ago, my father slapped me across the face so hard that I saw stars. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I refused to hand over the penthouse apartment that my grandmother had left specifically to me in her will. He wanted me to give it to my sister Emma, his precious golden child, who had just gotten engaged and needed somewhere suitable to start her new life. When I said no, when I dared to stand up for myself for the first time in 26 years, his hand connected with my cheek with a sound that echoed through our family's marble foyer like a gunshot. What he didn't know in that moment, what none of them knew, was that I had been planning for this day my entire life. And I was about to destroy everything they thought they knew about our perfect family. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with that slap. It starts 26 years earlier, in a hospital room in Chicago, when I was born exactly 18 minutes before my twin sister Emma. 18 minutes that, according to my parents, meant absolutely nothing, except that somehow Emma emerged as the chosen one and I became the spare part. Growing up, I learned to recognize the signs early. When we were 5, Emma got the bigger bedroom because, as Mom explained, Emma needs more space for all her toys. Never mind that we had received exactly the same number of toys that Christmas. When we were 8, Emma got piano lessons while I was told we could only afford lessons for one child, and since Emma had shown more natural aptitude, it made sense to invest in her future. When we were 12, Emma got to go to summer camp while I stayed home because, and I quote, "Madison is more of a homebody anyway." The pattern was so consistent that I started documenting it. Not in some dramatic diary, but in a simple notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. Every slight, every double standard, every moment when my parents' favoritism became so obvious that even strangers would notice. Like the time we were at a restaurant for our 16th birthday, and the waiter brought out a cake with "Happy Birthday, Emma" written in frosting. When I pointed out that it was my birthday too, my father actually told the waiter, "Oh, don't worry about it. One cake is fine." The waiter looked so uncomfortable that he brought out a second cake on the house, but my parents never even acknowledged what had happened. High school was where things really started to crystallize for me. Emma was the popular one, the cheerleader, the homecoming queen. I was the invisible twin, the one teachers sometimes forgot was even in their classes. But here's what nobody realized. Being invisible gave me a superpower. I could observe everything without anyone noticing. I could see how my parents' faces would literally light up when Emma walked into a room, and how their expressions would become neutral, almost disappointed, when they realized it was just me. I could hear their hushed conversations about Emma's future, about the colleges they were researching for her, about the connections they were making to help her career. They never had those conversations about me. Emma got into Northwestern with my parents' help and connections. I got into the local state school because, as my father put it, Madison has always been more practical. She doesn't need all the bells and whistles that Emma requires. What he meant was that they weren't willing to spend the same amount of money on my education as they were on Emma's. What he didn't know was that I had also been accepted to Northwestern, with a partial scholarship that would have made the cost difference negligible. I never told them. I took the path of least resistance, as I always did, and went to state. But state turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, because that's where I met my grandmother Evelyn. My father's mother had been estranged from the family for most of my childhood. There had been some kind of falling out when Emma and I were very young, something about my parents' parenting style that Grandma Evelyn had objected to. She had tried to maintain a relationship with Emma and me, but my parents had made it clear that she wasn't welcome. They painted her as bitter and jealous, as someone who couldn't accept that their son had built a successful life without her interference. During my sophomore year at State, I was working at a coffee shop near campus to help pay for my textbooks when an elegant older woman with silver hair and bright green eyes approached my counter. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she said, "You must be Madison. You have your grandfather's eyes." It was Grandma Evelyn. She had been living in Chicago for the past 15 years, just 40 minutes from where I was going to school. She explained that she had been keeping tabs on Emma and me from a distance, that she knew about my parents' favoritism and had been waiting for the right moment to reconnect. She had chosen to approach me first because, as she put it, "Emma already has enough people in her corner. You look like you could use an ally." Over the next 2 years, Grandma Evelyn and I developed a relationship that I had never experienced with any adult in my life. She actually listened when I talked. She remembered things I told her. She celebrated my achievements, no matter how small, and she never once compared me to Emma. When I made Dean's List, she took me out to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Chicago. When I got my first internship at a small marketing firm, she sent me flowers at work. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration, she was the only family member in the audience because my parents were at Emma's sorority formal in Evanston. But more than the emotional support, Grandma Evelyn taught me about power. Real power, not the superficial kind that my parents wielded through their money and social connections. She taught me about patience, about playing the long game, about building yourself up quietly while everyone else is distracted by shinier objects. She had built her own real estate empire from nothing, starting with a single apartment building in the 1970s and eventually owning properties all over the Midwest. She was worth more money than my parents had ever dreamed of, but she lived modestly and never flaunted her wealth. The thing about being underestimated, Madison, she told me once over coffee, is that it gives you the element of surprise. People make their biggest mistakes when they think they're dealing with someone powerless. After graduation, I moved back to Chicago and got a job at a mid-size marketing firm. Not because I needed my parents' permission or support, but because Grandma Evelyn had helped me understand that sometimes you have to play the role everyone expects of you while you build your real life behind the scenes. My parents were relieved that I was finally settling down and not causing any drama. Emma had just graduated from Northwestern and was working at a prestigious consulting firm, making twice my salary and living in a luxury apartment that my parents helped her afford. I was living in a modest one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, driving a used Honda, and generally being the responsible, predictable daughter they had always seen me as. What they didn't know was that I was also building my own investment portfolio, guided by Grandma Evelyn's expertise and funded by the money I saved by living below my means. While Emma was spending her entire salary on designer clothes and expensive dinners, I was learning about real estate markets, studying property values, and preparing for the day when I would step out of the shadows. That day came 3 years later, on a rainy Thursday in October, when I got the call that changed everything. Grandma Evelyn had died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. I was the only family member listed as her emergency contact, which should have been my first clue about what was coming. The funeral was small and private, attended mostly by her business associates and a few close friends she had made over the years. My parents came, of course, along with Emma, but they seemed more interested in the networking opportunities than in actually mourning the woman they had cut out of their lives. The real shock came a week later, at the reading of the will. Grandma Evelyn's estate was valued at just over $12 million. $12 million. My parents had always assumed she was just getting by on her Social Security and maybe a small pension. They had no idea that the modest apartment she lived in was just one of 37 properties she owned across 3 states. But here's the beautiful part. She had left specific instructions about how her estate should be distributed, and those instructions were designed to reveal exactly what she thought of my parents' treatment of me over the years. To my parents, she left a single dollar each, with a note stating that this was more than they deserved for the way they had raised their daughters. To Emma, she left $50,000 and a letter explaining that while Emma was not responsible for my parents' favoritism, she had never once stood up for me or acknowledged how unfairly I was treated. The letter was kind but firm, explaining that Emma had received enough advantages in life and didn't need any more. To me, she left everything else. The entire real estate portfolio, her investment accounts, her personal belongings, and most importantly, her crown jewel. A penthouse apartment in one of Chicago's most exclusive buildings, worth over $2 million on its own. The will reading took place in a conference room at her attorney's office, with all of us sitting around a polished oak table as the lawyer methodically went through each bequest. I watched my parents' faces go from polite attention to confusion to absolute fury as they realized what was happening. Emma just looked stunned, like she couldn't process that someone had chosen me over her. When the lawyer finished reading, there was complete silence for almost a full minute. Then my father stood up so abruptly that his chair fell over backward. "This is ridiculous," he said, his face turning red. She was clearly not in her right mind when she wrote this will. No rational person would leave that kind of money to He gestured at me like I was some kind of pest that had wandered into the room. To their granddaughter? The lawyer asked calmly. He was an older man with gray hair and steel-rimmed glasses, and he clearly dealt with this kind of family drama on a regular basis. Mrs. Patterson was quite lucid when she updated her will 6 months ago. She also anticipated that there might be some objection to her decisions, which is why she requested that I share this with you. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my father's name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Grandma Evelyn's handwriting. The lawyer read it aloud. Robert, if you are hearing this, it means you are probably angry that I chose to leave my estate to Madison rather than dividing it equally between your daughters. Let me be very clear about why I made this decision. For 23 years, I watched you favor Emma over Madison in ways both large and small. I watched you give Emma opportunities while expecting Madison to be grateful for scraps. I watched you light up when Emma walked into a room and barely acknowledge Madison's existence. You raised one daughter to believe she deserved the world and the other to believe she deserved nothing. Madison has spent her entire life being overlooked and undervalued by her own family, while Emma has never wanted for anything. This is my attempt to balance the scales. If you have a problem with my decision, I suggest you examine how your own decisions led to this moment. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother was staring at me like she had never seen me before. Emma was crying quietly, whether from shock or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. My father was standing there with his hands clenched into fists, looking like he wanted to hit someone. This doesn't change anything, he finally said. Madison, you're going to do the right thing here. You're going to share this inheritance with your sister, like any decent person would do. I had been waiting my entire life for this moment, not the inheritance itself, but the moment when I would finally have the power to say no to them, to stand up for myself, to stop being the accommodating daughter who always sacrificed for the sake of family peace. Actually, Dad, I said, and my voice was steadier than it had ever been, I'm not going to do that at all. The look of shock on his face was almost worth 26 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. Almost. For the next 2 months, they tried everything. First came the guilt trips. Daily phone calls from my mother about how disappointed she was in my selfishness, about how this wasn't what family was supposed to be about. Emma sent long text messages about how hurt she was, about how she had always thought we were close, about how she couldn't believe I was being so cruel to her during what was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. Because, of course, Emma had gotten engaged 2 weeks after the will reading to her boyfriend of 3 years, a junior investment banker named Brad who came from the kind of old money family that my parents desperately wanted to impress. Then came the manipulation attempts. My father offered to double my salary if I would come work for his consulting firm and be part of the family business. When I declined, he switched tactics and started talking about how proud he was of the woman I had become, how he had always known I was the more responsible daughter, how he should have appreciated me more over the years. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard him say anything like that about me, and the fact that it was so obviously transactional made it even more insulting than his usual indifference. When the gentle approach didn't work, they brought in reinforcements. Aunts and uncles started calling me. Cousins I barely knew began reaching out on social media. Family friends, who had never given me a second thought, suddenly wanted to meet for coffee to talk sense into me. They all had the same message. Family comes first, blood is thicker than water. Surely I could find it in my heart to share my good fortune with my sister, who needed it more than I did. The irony was that Emma didn't actually need the money. She and Brad were both making excellent salaries, and his family had already offered to buy them a house as an engagement gift. But Emma had fallen in love with Grandma Evelyn's penthouse the moment she saw it, and now that she couldn't have it, it had become the only thing in the world that would make her happy. She started showing up at my apartment unannounced, sometimes with tear-streaked makeup, sometimes with Brad in tow looking uncomfortable and apologetic. She would sit on my couch and talk about how we used to share everything when we were kids, about how she had always looked up to me, about how she couldn't understand why I was being so cold to her now. I know Mom and Dad weren't always fair, she said during one of these visits, which was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging the elephant in the room. But that's not my fault, Madison. I never asked them to treat you differently, and I've always loved you exactly the same as you loved me. It was that last sentence that really got to me, because it was such a perfect encapsulation of Emma's worldview. She genuinely believed that she had loved me exactly the same because in her mind, love was a feeling, not an action. She had never once stood up for me when our parents were obviously favoring her. She had never once questioned why she got opportunities that I didn't. She had never once used her privileged position to advocate for me or include me or even acknowledge that the disparity existed. But because she felt warm, sisterly feelings toward me, she thought that was enough. 3 months after the will reading, Emma's wedding planning was in full swing, and the pressure on me had reached a fever pitch. The penthouse had become not just a nice place to live, but the symbol of Emma's perfect life, the missing piece that would complete her fairy tale. My parents had found a wedding planner who specialized in luxury events. They had booked a venue that cost more than most people's cars, and they were flying in relatives from all over the country to witness Emma's big day. But Emma was miserable because she didn't have the perfect home to go with her perfect wedding and her perfect husband. The house that Brad's parents had offered to buy was lovely, a 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale suburb, but it wasn't the glamorous city penthouse that Emma had envisioned for her new married life. She had become obsessed with the idea that the penthouse was rightfully hers, that Grandma Evelyn had made a mistake, that I was stealing her dreams out of petty jealousy. That's when my parents decided to escalate. It was a Saturday afternoon in January, and I was at home working on some freelance marketing projects I had taken on to supplement my income while I figured out what to do with my inheritance. I hadn't quit my day job yet, because despite having millions of dollars in assets, most of it was tied up in real estate and long-term investments. I was living on my regular salary and trying to be smart about my newfound wealth, which was exactly the kind of responsible behavior that my parents would have praised in Emma, but somehow found suspicious in me. I heard my parents' car in the driveway before I saw them. They had keys to my apartment, a fact I was suddenly regretting, because they walked in without knocking like they owned the place. Both of them looked more serious than I had seen them since the funeral. My mother was carrying a thick folder, and my father had that expression he got when he was about to deliver bad news to a client. "Madison, we need to talk," he said without any kind of greeting. They sat down on my couch without being invited and spread out the contents of the folder on my coffee table. Legal documents, property assessments, financial statements, and what looked like architectural plans. "We've been doing some research," my mother said, "and we think there might be some irregularities with your grandmother's will." My stomach dropped, even though I had been half expecting something like this. "What kind of irregularities?" "Well, for starters, the property values seem inflated," my father said, pointing to one of the assessments. "We had the penthouse appraised by our own people, and it's worth maybe 1.4 million, not the 2.2 that's listed in the estate documents." This was ridiculous, and I told them so. "Dad, the estate was settled by a probate court. Professional appraisers were involved. You can't just decide you don't like the numbers." "We're not deciding anything," my mother said. "We're just pointing out that there are questions that need to be answered. And then there's the matter of your relationship with your grandmother." She pulled out what looked like bank statements and credit card bills. "We found evidence that you were in regular contact with her for years before she died. You were having dinners, she was giving you gifts, you were clearly influencing her decisions about the will." I stared at them, trying to process what they were suggesting. "Are you accusing me of manipulating Grandma Evelyn?" "We're not accusing you of anything," my father said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "We're just saying that it looks suspicious. A grandmother who barely had a relationship with her family suddenly leaves everything to one granddaughter who happened to be cultivating a relationship with her in the years before her death." The unfairness of it took my breath away. For my entire life, they had ignored me, dismissed me, treated me like an afterthought. Now, when I finally had something of value, something that was legally and rightfully mine, they were suggesting that I had somehow stolen it through manipulation and deceit. "You cut her out of your lives," I said, and I could hear my voice getting louder. "You made it clear that she wasn't welcome in this family. You told Emma and me that she was bitter and jealous and that we were better off without her. So yes, I had a relationship with her. Yes, she cared about me and I cared about her. Yes, she left me her estate because she thought I deserved it and Emma didn't. That's not manipulation, that's just the consequences of your choices." My mother's face hardened. "Don't you dare take that tone with us, Madison. We are your parents and we raised you better than this. The right thing to do is to share this inheritance with your sister. Emma is getting married, she's starting a family, she needs this more than you do." Emma has everything, I said. Emma has always had everything. She has your love, your support, your financial help, and now she has a wealthy fiancé and his family's support too. What exactly does she need that she doesn't already have? She needs her sister to stop being selfish and vindictive, my father said. She needs her twin to remember that family comes first. When has family ever come first for me? I asked. When has anyone in this family ever put my needs ahead of Emma's? They didn't have an answer for that, probably because they had never even considered the question before. My father stood up and started pacing around my small living room like a caged animal. This is ridiculous. You're being completely unreasonable. Your grandmother clearly wasn't thinking straight when she wrote that will. No grandmother leaves everything to one grandchild and practically nothing to the other. It's not natural. What's not natural, I said, is parents who treat one child like a princess and the other like a servant. That's when he snapped. My father stopped pacing and turned to face me, his face red with anger. You know what, Madison? I am sick and tired of your attitude. I am sick of your self-pity and your victim complex and your refusal to act like a member of this family. Your sister is getting married in 4 months, and she deserves to start her new life in a beautiful home. You are going to sign over the penthouse to Emma, and you're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. No, I said. It was the simplest word in the English language, but it felt revolutionary coming out of my mouth. I'm not going to do that. Yes, you are, he said, and his voice had gone dangerously quiet. Because if you don't, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? He picked up the legal documents from my coffee table and waved them at me. We're prepared to contest the will. We have evidence that you manipulated your grandmother, that you isolated her from her family, that you took advantage of an elderly woman for financial gain. We'll tie this up in court for years if we have to. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You would really do that? You would drag Grandma Evelyn's memory through the mud and destroy any chance of our family staying together, just to get Emma a penthouse she doesn't need? We wouldn't be destroying anything, my mother said. You're the one who's destroying this family with your selfishness. I looked at both of them, these people who had raised me but had never really seen me, who had given me life but had spent 26 years making me feel like that life didn't matter very much. And I realized that this wasn't really about the penthouse at all. This was about power, about control, about their inability to accept that for once in my life, I had something that Emma wanted and they couldn't just take it away and give it to her. Get out, I said. Madison, my mother started. Get out of my apartment, now, both of you. My father took a step toward me, and I could see the anger blazing in his eyes. You don't get to dismiss us, young lady. We are your parents, and you will show us respect. Respect is earned, I said, and you stopped earning mine a long time ago. That's when he hit me. I didn't see it coming. 1 second I was standing in my living room, feeling stronger and more confident than I had ever felt in my life, and the next second my father's hand was connecting with my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side and send me stumbling backward into my bookshelf. The sound of the slap echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. For a moment, all 3 of us just stood there in complete silence, shocked by what had just happened. I could taste blood in my mouth where I had bitten my tongue, and my cheek felt like it was on fire. My mother gasped and brought her hand to her mouth. My father looked stunned, like he couldn't believe what he had just done. And I just stood there, holding my cheek, finally understanding with perfect clarity exactly what kind of people my parents really were. Madison, my father started, but I cut him off. Get out, I said again, and my voice was deadly calm. Get out right now, or I'm calling the police. They left. My father grabbed the legal documents from the coffee table, my mother gathered up her purse, and they walked out of my apartment without another word. I locked the door behind them and slid the chain into place, then went to the bathroom to look at my face in the mirror. There was already a red handprint on my left cheek, and I could see that it was going to bruise. My lip was bleeding where I had bitten it, and my eyes were watering, though whether from the physical pain or the emotional shock, I wasn't sure. I took a picture of my face with my phone. Then I took several more from different angles, making sure the timestamp was visible. Then I called the police and filed a report for domestic violence. I didn't do it because I wanted my father arrested, though part of me thought he deserved it. I did it because I knew that this was just the beginning, not the end, and I wanted everything documented. The police officer who came to take my statement was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She took photos of my injuries, wrote down my account of what had happened, and gave me information about resources for domestic violence victims. She also explained that I could press charges if I wanted to, but that the decision was mine to make. "Has your father ever hit you before?" she asked. "No," I said. "This is the first time he's ever been physically violent with me." "What about other kinds of abuse? Emotional, psychological, financial?" I thought about that for a long time before answering. "I don't know," I finally said. "Maybe. I always thought it was just favoritism, just him preferring my sister over me, but looking back, I think maybe there was more to it than that." She nodded like she had heard this story before. Abuse isn't always obvious, especially when it's happening gradually over a long period of time. If you decide you want to pursue charges, or if you need help with anything else, here's my card. After she left, I sat in my apartment for a long time, just thinking. My cheek was throbbing, and I could already see that the bruise was going to be spectacular, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional clarity I was experiencing. For 26 years, I had made excuses for my parents' behavior. I had told myself that they just related better to Emma's personality, that they weren't trying to hurt me, that every family had its dynamics and this was just ours. I had convinced myself that if I just tried harder, if I was just more successful, or more accomplished, or more whatever, maybe they would finally see me as worthy of their love and attention. But sitting there with my father's handprint on my face, I finally understood the truth. They didn't see me as less accomplished than Emma. They saw me as less human. In their minds, Emma was the real daughter, the one who mattered, the one whose feelings and needs and dreams were important. I was just the spare, the backup plan, the one who was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. Well, I was done being grateful. I was done being accommodating. I was done pretending that their treatment of me was acceptable or normal or loving. I was going to war, but not the kind of war they expected. Not screaming matches or dramatic confrontations or public scenes. I was going to fight the way Grandma Evelyn had taught me, quietly, strategically, with patience and planning and the element of surprise. The first thing I did was hire the best family law attorney in Chicago. Her name was Victoria Chen, and she specialized in estate disputes and family conflicts involving significant assets. She was expensive, but I could afford her now, and I wanted someone who could match my parents' resources and connections. Victoria was a small woman in her 40s with short black hair and steel-rimmed glasses that reminded me of Grandma Evelyn's lawyer. When I showed her the photos of my bruised face and told her about my parents' threats to contest the will, her expression didn't change, but I could see something cold and calculating in her eyes. "Your parents are going to have a very difficult time contesting this will," she said, after reviewing all the documents. "Your grandmother was clearly of sound mind when she wrote it. It was properly witnessed and notarized, and the estate was settled through probate court with no objections at the time. The fact that they waited 3 months to raise concerns about it makes their case even weaker." "But what if they can prove that I was manipulating her?" I asked. Victoria smiled for the first time since I had walked into her office. "What manipulation? You had a relationship with your grandmother. You spent time with her, you cared about her, and she left you her estate because she wanted to. That's not manipulation, that's family. The fact that your parents are calling it manipulation says more about them than it does about you." She pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Tell me more about this physical assault." I told her everything, from the moment my parents walked into my apartment to the moment they left. I showed her the police report and the photos. I explained about the years of favoritism, about Emma's engagement, about their increasing pressure on me to share the inheritance. "Good," she said when I finished. "This gives us leverage. If your parents want to make this ugly, we can make it very ugly for them. A successful businessman who assaults his adult daughter because she won't give her inheritance to his favorite child, that's not going to play well in court or in the media." The media. I hadn't thought about that, but Victoria was right. My father's consulting firm relied on its reputation for integrity and family values. If word got out that he was involved in a nasty family dispute over an inheritance, it could seriously damage his business. "What do you want to happen here, Madison?" Victoria asked. "Do you want to keep the entire inheritance and cut your family out of your life? Do you want them to leave you alone? Do you want revenge? You need to be clear about your goals so I can help you achieve them." I thought about that for a long time. What did I want? I wanted them to understand how they had made me feel for 26 years. I wanted them to experience what it was like to be powerless, to have someone you love treat you like you don't matter. I wanted them to face consequences for their actions, real consequences that couldn't be smoothed over or explained away or forgotten. But more than that, I wanted to be free. I wanted to live my life without constantly wondering if I was good enough, without measuring my worth by how much attention my parents paid to me, without feeling like I had to earn love that should have been freely given. I want them to leave me alone, I said finally. I want them to stop trying to manipulate me and threaten me and make me feel guilty for finally standing up for myself. I want Emma to find her own path without expecting me to pave it for her. And I want my father to face consequences for hitting me. Victoria nodded and made more notes. We can make that happen, but you need to understand that once we start down this road, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will never be the same. It was never really a relationship anyway, I said. It was just me desperately trying to earn something that was never going to be given. Over the next month, Victoria and I built our strategy. She filed a restraining order against my father on my behalf, citing the assault and his threats about contesting the will. She also sent a formal cease and desist letter to my parents' attorney, making it clear that any attempt to contest Grandma Evelyn's will would result in a countersuit for harassment and intimidation. But the real masterstroke was something I thought of during one of our meetings. What if we made this public? I suggested. Not in a trashy way, but in a way that tells the real story about what happened here. Victoria looked intrigued. What do you mean? I had been thinking about this for weeks. My parents operated in a world where reputation was everything, where their standing in the community was tied to their business success and their family image. They were well known in Chicago's professional and social circles, the kind of people who attended charity galas and served on nonprofit boards and prided themselves on being pillars of the community. My father hit me because I wouldn't give my inheritance to my sister, I said. That's the story. That's what really happened here. What if people knew that? Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. That's a nuclear option, Madison. Once that story is out there, it's out there forever. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of scrutiny? I thought about all the years I had spent being invisible, being overlooked, being treated like my thoughts and feelings didn't matter. I thought about the way my parents had tried to gaslight me into believing that their favoritism was normal, that my feelings were invalid, that I was selfish for wanting basic respect and equality. I'm ready, I said. The story broke on a slow Tuesday in March, in the lifestyle section of the Chicago Tribune. The headline read, "The Price of Favoritism, a Chicago Family's Battle Over Love, Money, and Justice." The reporter, a woman named Sarah Kim who specialized in family and social issues, had interviewed me extensively about my childhood, my relationship with Grandma Evelyn, and the events that led to my father assaulting me in my own apartment. I had been nervous about talking to a reporter, worried that the story would come across as whining or self-pity. But Sarah was skilled at her job, and she understood the broader social issues at play. Parental favoritism, family dynamics, the way childhood emotional abuse can shape adult relationships. She presented my story not as a sob story, but as a case study in how family dysfunction can escalate into real harm when left unchecked. The article included quotes from family psychology experts about the long-term effects of parental favoritism, statistics about domestic violence between family members, and legal experts discussing the growing trend of adult children cutting contact with toxic parents. My story was the centerpiece, but it was presented in the context of broader social issues that many readers could relate to. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the article going online, I had dozens of messages from strangers sharing their own stories of parental favoritism and family dysfunction. People who had been the overlooked child, people who had struggled with golden child syndrome like Emma, people who had cut contact with their families and felt guilty about it. The story had struck a nerve. But more importantly, it had reached my parents' professional and social circles. By the end of the week, my father's business was fielding calls from concerned clients who had read the article. The nonprofit board he served on quietly asked him to step down until the family situation was resolved. The country club where my parents socialized was buzzing with gossip about the prominent businessman who had assaulted his daughter over money. Emma called me the day after the article was published, sobbing into the phone. "How could you do this to us?" she cried. "How could you put our private family business in the newspaper for everyone to see? The same way Dad could hit me in my own apartment," I said calmly. Sometimes people's true colors come out when they're under pressure. But Madison, this is destroying our family. People are saying horrible things about Mom and Dad. Brad's parents are asking questions about whether they want to be associated with our family. My wedding planner is getting calls from reporters. I felt a moment of sympathy for Emma because I knew that none of this was entirely her fault. She had been raised to believe that she deserved special treatment, but she hadn't created the system that gave it to her. Still, she had never questioned that system or tried to change it, and now she was experiencing what it felt like to face consequences for the first time in her life. "Emma," I said, "this could all go away tomorrow if Mom and Dad would just apologize and leave me alone. All they have to do is accept that Grandma Evelyn left me her estate for a reason, stop trying to manipulate me into giving it to you, and acknowledge that hitting me was wrong. That's it. This doesn't have to be complicated." "They're never going to do that," she said, and for the first time in our lives, she sounded like she really understood who our parents were. She was right. Over the next several weeks, my parents doubled down on their position. They hired a crisis management firm to handle the media attention, and they started giving interviews of their own, painting themselves as concerned parents who were trying to protect their family from a vindictive daughter who was willing to destroy them over money. Their version of the story was that I had manipulated my elderly grandmother, isolated her from her family, and then used my inheritance to wage a campaign of revenge against my loving parents, who were only trying to encourage me to share my good fortune with my sister. The assault, they claimed, was a momentary loss of control by a father who was heartbroken to see his family torn apart by greed. It was a compelling narrative, and it might have worked if I hadn't been so thorough in documenting everything. Victoria had taught me to save every text message, every email, every voicemail. We had recordings of my parents threatening to contest the will, written evidence of their years of favoritism, and multiple witnesses who could testify about their treatment of me versus their treatment of Emma. When their crisis management team tried to paint Grandma Evelyn as a confused old woman who had been taken advantage of, Victoria produced medical records showing that she had been in excellent mental health right up until her death. When they suggested that I had isolated her from the family, we had testimony from her friends and neighbors about how she had tried for years to maintain a relationship with her son and granddaughters, only to be rebuffed by my parents at every turn. The custody hearing for the restraining order became the public showdown that neither side really wanted, but both sides felt compelled to fight. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family friends, and random observers who had been following the story in the media. My father's attorney argued that the restraining order was unnecessary, that my father deeply regretted his moment of poor judgment, and that I was using the legal system to wage a personal vendetta against my family. He painted me as a troubled young woman who had been poisoned against her family by a manipulative grandmother, and who was now lashing out at the people who loved her most. Victoria's response was devastating in its simplicity. She played a voicemail my father had left me 3 days after the assault, in which he never once apologized for hitting me, but instead demanded that I stop this nonsense and think about what's best for the family. She read text messages from my mother calling me selfish and vindictive for refusing to share my inheritance. She presented a timeline of escalating harassment and intimidation tactics that my parents had used when I wouldn't comply with their demands. But the moment that changed everything was when Victoria called Emma to the witness stand. Emma had been subpoenaed to testify about the family dynamics, and she clearly didn't want to be there. She was wearing a conservative navy dress and minimal makeup, probably on the advice of my parents' legal team, and she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Victoria's questioning started gently, establishing Emma's relationship to the family and her knowledge of the inheritance dispute. Then she started asking about our childhood, about the differences in how we were treated, about specific instances of favoritism that Emma had witnessed or been part of. "Ms. Patterson," Victoria said, "did you ever notice any differences in how your parents treated you versus how they treated Madison?" Emma glanced at our parents, who were sitting in the front row behind their legal team. I don't know what you mean. Let me be more specific. Did you and Madison receive equal treatment in terms of educational opportunities?" A long pause. "We both went to good schools. But did you go to the same schools?" "No, I went to Northwestern and Madison went to State." "And who made that decision?" Another pause. My parents thought Northwestern was a better fit for me. Did Madison apply to Northwestern? Emma looked miserable. I don't know. Did you ever ask? No. Victoria continued this line of questioning for 20 minutes, methodically walking through instance after instance where Emma had received opportunities or support that I hadn't. The piano lessons, the summer camps, the college fund, the job connections, the financial support for her apartment. With each question, Emma looked smaller and more uncomfortable, and our parents looked more and more like the villains they actually were. But the moment that broke Emma was when Victoria asked her about the penthouse. Ms. Patterson, when you learned that your grandmother had left her penthouse to Madison, what was your reaction? I was surprised. Were you upset? Yes. Why were you upset? Emma was quiet for so long that the judge asked her to answer the question. Because I wanted it, she finally said, so quietly that the court reporter had to ask her to repeat herself. You wanted the penthouse that your grandmother had specifically left to your sister? Yes. Did you think you deserved it more than Madison did? Emma started crying. Not the manipulative tears she had used on me in my apartment, but real, genuine sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. I don't know, she said between sobs. I always got what I wanted. I always got the best of everything. And when Madison finally got something that I wanted, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle not being the special one anymore. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of Emma crying. Our parents looked like they had been turned to stone. Even their attorney seemed shocked by Emma's honesty. Ms. Patterson, Victoria said gently, in your opinion, did your parents treat Madison fairly throughout your childhood? Emma looked at me for the first time since she had taken the stand. Her makeup was running down her cheeks, and she looked younger than I had ever seen her look. No, she said. They didn't, and I knew it, and I never said anything because I liked being the favorite. I liked being the one who got everything. And I'm sorry, Madison. I'm so sorry. The judge granted my restraining order and made it clear that any attempt by my parents to contest Grandma Evelyn's will would be viewed as harassment. He also strongly suggested that my father attend anger management counseling and that my family consider mediation to resolve their differences. But I was done with mediation. I was done with trying to fix relationships that had been broken from the beginning. I was done with people who only wanted to change their behavior after facing consequences for it. The next day, I put my modest apartment up for sale and started making plans to move into Grandma Evelyn's penthouse. I had been avoiding it since inheriting it, partly because it felt too overwhelming and partly because I hadn't wanted to seem like I was flaunting my good fortune. But Emma's testimony had changed something in me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I deserved good things. I felt like I deserved to live in a beautiful home and enjoy the inheritance that my grandmother had left me because she loved me. The penthouse was everything Emma had described and more. 2 floors, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Lake Michigan, a gourmet kitchen, a library that had been Grandma Evelyn's pride and joy, and a rooftop terrace that felt like a private oasis in the middle of the city. It was the kind of place I had never imagined myself living in, the kind of place that felt like it belonged to someone more important than me. But as I walked through the rooms, touching Grandma Evelyn's books and looking at her photographs and reading the personal notes she had left for me throughout the apartment, I realized that I was exactly the person this place belonged to. I was the granddaughter who had loved her enough to spend time with her when everyone else was too busy. I was the person she had chosen to carry on her legacy. The first thing I did was hang a framed copy of the newspaper article in the hallway, right next to a photo of Grandma Evelyn and me at her 80th birthday party. Not because I was proud of the family drama, but because I was proud of finally standing up for myself. Emma came to see me a few weeks later, after I had settled into the penthouse. She looked different than she had in court, older, more subdued. The perfect composure she had always maintained was gone, replaced by something I had never seen in her before, genuine vulnerability. She stood in the doorway of the penthouse, looking around at the space she had coveted for so long, and I could see her trying not to cry. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's everything I thought it would be." I invited her in, and we sat on the couch that had once been Grandma Evelyn's favorite spot for our afternoon conversations. Emma was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked more like the sister I remembered from childhood than the polished socialite she had become. "I've been thinking a lot since the hearing," she said. "About everything Victoria asked me, about all those things I never wanted to admit to myself, and I realized something that's been really hard to face." She took a shaky breath before continuing. I destroyed our relationship long before any of this happened. Every time Mom and Dad chose me over you, every time they gave me something and you got nothing, I told myself it wasn't my fault. I told myself I couldn't control their behavior. But the truth is, I never even tried to change it. I never stood up for you, not even once. I just enjoyed being the favorite and convinced myself that you were okay with it. I had waited my entire life to hear those words from Emma, but now that she was saying them, I felt more sadness than satisfaction. Why now? I asked. Why are you telling me this now? Emma's face crumpled. Because I lost everything, Madison. The media attention, the scandal, it's destroyed my engagement. Brad's family doesn't want to be associated with our family anymore. They're calling off the wedding. My job at the consulting firm is in jeopardy because everyone there has seen the articles. I've lost all my friends because they don't want to be dragged into this mess. For the first time in my life, I'm experiencing what it feels like to be the one nobody wants, and it's horrible. She was crying openly now, the kind of raw, desperate tears I remembered from when we were children and she had scraped her knee or lost a toy. But this was different. This was the sound of someone whose entire worldview had collapsed. I keep thinking about all those times you tried to talk to me about how unfairly you were being treated, and I just dismissed your feelings or changed the subject. I told myself you were being dramatic, that you were exaggerating, that it wasn't as bad as you made it seem. But it was, wasn't it? It was exactly as bad as you said, and I just didn't want to see it because seeing it would have meant giving up my special status. I watched my sister fall apart on my couch, and I realized that this moment was exactly what I had thought I wanted. For 26 years, I had fantasized about the day when Emma would finally understand how it felt to be overlooked, to be second choice, to have the people who were supposed to love you treat you like you didn't matter. I had imagined that seeing her suffer would feel like justice, like vindication, like proof that I had been right all along. But it didn't feel like any of those things. It just felt sad and empty and pointless. Emma, I said gently, I'm not responsible for what happened to your engagement or your job. Those are consequences of choices that Mom and Dad made, not me. If Brad's family doesn't want to be associated with a man who hits his daughter over money, that's their right. If your employer is concerned about being connected to this kind of scandal, that's their prerogative. I didn't create this situation. I just refused to be a victim in it anymore. She nodded through her tears. I know it's not your fault. That's what makes this so much worse. I spent my whole life thinking I was the good daughter, the one Mom and Dad could be proud of, the one who did everything right. But I wasn't good, was I? I was just complicit. I was part of the system that hurt you, and I never even cared enough to question it. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing 26 years of dysfunction and pain. Finally, Emma spoke again. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I don't even think I deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry, really, truly sorry. Not because I lost everything, but because I finally understand what I put you through, what we all put you through. I looked at my sister, this person who had shared a womb with me, who had been my first companion in the world, who had become a stranger through years of preferential treatment and willful blindness. I thought about Grandma Evelyn's words about power and patience and the element of surprise. She had taught me that revenge was not about destroying your enemies, but about building something better than what they tried to tear down. I can't give you the forgiveness you're looking for, Emma, I said finally. At least not right now. The hurt runs too deep and has lasted too long for me to just forget about it because you've finally acknowledged what happened, but I can give you something else. Emma looked at me with hope and fear in equal measure. I can give you the chance to be a different person than you were before. You said you've lost everything, but that's not entirely true. You've lost the things that were built on a foundation of inequality and dysfunction. But you still have your intelligence, your education, your work ethic when you choose to apply it. You still have the opportunity to build a life based on your own merit instead of your parents' favoritism. Emma was listening intently, like she was trying to memorize every word. The Emma who walked in here today, the one who can acknowledge her mistakes and take responsibility for her actions, is someone I could potentially have a relationship with someday. But the Emma who expected me to sacrifice everything for her happiness, who thought she deserved whatever she wanted just because she'd always gotten it before, that person is someone I can never trust again. Emma nodded slowly. I understand. And I want to be different. I want to be the kind of person who earns things instead of expecting them to be handed to me. I want to be the kind of sister who supports you instead of competing with you. I just don't know how to do that yet. Then figure it out, I said, not unkindly. Get therapy. Take some time to understand how you became the person you were and how you can become the person you want to be. Build a life that's yours, not just an extension of mom and dad's expectations. And maybe someday, when you've done that work, we can try to build something new between us. Emma stood up to leave, and I could see her looking around the penthouse one more time. But instead of the covetous longing I had seen in her eyes before, there was something different now. Acceptance, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. For what it's worth, she said as I walked her to the door, Grandma Evelyn was right to leave this place to you. You're the one who loved her when the rest of us couldn't be bothered. You're the one who spent time with her and cared about her as a person instead of just seeing her as an obligation. You deserve this, Madison. You deserve all of it. After Emma left, I walked out onto the rooftop terrace and looked out over Lake Michigan. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected off the water like scattered jewels. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace. My phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. Parents' attorney called. They want to discuss terms for dropping any challenge to the will. Looks like the media pressure is working. I smiled and put my phone away without responding. They could wait. For 26 years, I had been at their beck and call, jumping whenever they snapped their fingers, grateful for any scrap of attention they threw my way. Now they could experience what it felt like to be the ones waiting for a response. Over the next few months, my new life began to take shape. I quit my marketing job and started my own consulting firm, using the business knowledge Grandma Evelyn had taught me and the financial backing from my inheritance. I specialized in helping family-owned businesses navigate succession planning and conflict resolution, drawing on my own experiences to guide other families away from the destructive patterns that had nearly torn mine apart. The work was fulfilling in a way I had never experienced before. Instead of being the invisible daughter struggling for recognition, I was the expert that people sought out for my knowledge and insight. Instead of being grateful for whatever opportunities others chose to give me, I was creating my own opportunities and building my own success. My parents eventually agreed to leave me alone, signing a formal agreement through their attorney that they would make no further attempts to contest the will or interfere with my inheritance. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges against my father for the assault. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was closure. Emma kept her word about wanting to change. She left Chicago and moved to Portland, where she took a job with a nonprofit organization that worked with underserved communities. She started therapy to work through the golden child syndrome that had shaped her entire identity. We exchanged emails occasionally, careful and distant, but not hostile. It was the first honest communication we had ever had as adults. 6 months after moving into the penthouse, I got an unexpected visitor. It was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who had lived next door to Grandma Evelyn and had become one of her closest friends in her final years. "I wanted to see how you were settling in," she said as I invited her in for tea. "Evelyn talked about you all the time, you know. She was so proud of the woman you were becoming." We sat in the library, surrounded by Grandma Evelyn's books and photographs, and Mrs. Chen shared stories I had never heard before. Stories about how my grandmother had worried about me throughout my childhood, how she had wanted to intervene, but had respected my parents' wishes to stay out of their family life. How she had celebrated every small achievement in my life that my own parents had overlooked. "She used to say that you reminded her of herself when she was young," Mrs. Chen told me. "Quiet and thoughtful, but with a strength that people underestimated. She said you were going to surprise everyone someday." As Mrs. Chen prepared to leave, she handed me a small wrapped package. "She asked me to give this to you after you had settled in properly. She said you would know when the time was right." Inside the package was a leather-bound journal with my name embossed on the cover. The first page contained a note in Grandma Evelyn's familiar handwriting. "My dear Madison, if you're reading this, it means you've found the courage to claim the life that you deserve. I'm so proud of you, not just for standing up to your family, but for becoming the kind of person who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult. This journal is for your new beginning. Fill it with your dreams, your plans, your hopes for the future. Fill it with the story of the woman you're becoming, not the girl who was overlooked for so long. All my love, Grandma Evelyn." I sat on the terrace that night, writing my first entry in the journal as the city lights sparkled below me. I wrote about the long journey that had brought me to this moment, about the pain of being invisible and the strength I had found in that invisibility. I wrote about the grandmother who had seen me when no one else would, and the inheritance that was so much more than money and property. But mostly, I wrote about the future I was building for myself. A future where I would never again have to beg for love or acceptance, where I would never again have to sacrifice my own happiness for someone else's comfort, where I would never again allow anyone to treat me as less than I was worth. As I finished writing and closed the journal, I realized that this wasn't really a revenge story at all. It was a liberation story. My parents hadn't lost because I had defeated them. They had lost because they had chosen power and control over love and connection. Emma hadn't lost because I had taken something away from her. She had lost because she had built her identity on a foundation that was never meant to last. And I hadn't won because I had hurt them back. I had won because I had finally learned to value myself the way Grandma Evelyn had always valued me. Standing on that terrace, surrounded by the life I had built and the legacy I had inherited, I understood that the greatest revenge against people who try to make you feel small is simply refusing to stay small. It's building something beautiful out of the pieces they tried to break. It's living so well and so authentically that their attempts to diminish you become irrelevant. I thought about the scared, invisible girl I had been for so many years, always wondering if she was good enough, always trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That girl was still part of me, but she was no longer in charge of my life. She had been replaced by a woman who knew her own worth, who understood that true strength comes not from being invulnerable, but from being willing to be vulnerable in service of something greater than yourself. As I looked out over the city that night, I made a promise to myself and to Grandma Evelyn's memory. I would use everything I had learned, everything I had inherited, not just to build my own life, but to help other people who had been made to feel invisible, who had been taught that they didn't matter, who had been told that their dreams were too big or their hopes too ambitious. I would be the person for others that Grandma Evelyn had been for me. The one who sees potential where others see problems, who offers hope where others offer criticism, who believes in the power of quiet strength to change the world one relationship at a time. The story that had started with a slap across my face and a family's attempt to steal my inheritance had ended with something much more valuable. The knowledge that I am enough, exactly as I am, and that no one has the power to make me feel otherwise ever again. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working in the library that was once Grandma Evelyn's sanctuary, I can almost hear her voice whispering the words that changed everything. The thing about being underestimated, Madison, is that it gives you the element of surprise. People make their biggest mistakes when they think they're dealing with someone powerless. I was never powerless. I just hadn't learned how to use my power yet. But I've learned now, and I'm never going back to being invisible again. The penthouse isn't just my home now. It's my fortress, my sanctuary, my reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be the victim in someone else's story. It's proof that love and legacy matter more than favoritism and control, that patience and strategy can triumph over bullying and manipulation, that the quiet ones are often the strongest ones of all. And every morning when I wake up in this beautiful place that my grandmother left me, every morning when I look out at the lake and remember how far I've come, I whisper a quiet thank you to the woman who saw me when no one else would, who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, who gave me not just an inheritance but an identity. This is my story, the story of how I went from being the invisible daughter to being the woman who built her own empire. The story of how I learned that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, but transcending the need for enemies at all. The story of how I discovered that the best revenge against people who try to make you feel small is simply refusing to stay small. And it all started with learning to say one simple word. No, that's the power they never wanted me to discover. That's the strength they never expected me to find. That's the victory they never saw coming. But Grandma Evelyn saw it coming. She always knew that the quiet granddaughter, the overlooked one, the invisible twin, was going to be the one who surprised everyone in the end.